Welcome everybody. I'm Nico, and I have recently written a book on recovering a missing period. Here it is, called No Period, Now What? It's not really recent. It took me 3.5 years. I thought it would take me a year, and not so much. Anyway, I wanted to do a quick video because I feel like that might be a great way to reach out to people. I lost my period about 10 years ago, and then over about the next 18 months, I did some research and managed to figure out what was going on. I gained back some weight that I had lost and cut my exercise by quite a bit. And eventually I ended up getting pregnant naturally after failed injectable cycles and thinking about doing IVF, and it was a big mess. Speaking of mess, I'm kind of a mess tonight. I was swimming with my kids today and I haven't showered yet, so forgive me, but I feel like that's really not important. What's important is what I have to say, and it doesn't really matter what I look like, and I think that's a really important lesson for all of us to learn, and I have definitely learned it as I've gotten older and wiser, I hope. So anyway, this is just a quick video to tell you a little bit about what hypothalamic amenorrhea is. It's a very technical term for basically a missing period, and your hypothalamus is a part of your brain that controls pretty much everything that your hormonal system does. So it controls your sleep, your temperature, hunger signals, whether you feel full or hungry, and your reproductive system. It also takes in a lot of inputs. So it takes in information about how much you've eaten, when you last ate, if you had carbs and proteins and fat, and if you're stressed, like if you're psychologically stressed, you'll have some of the cortisol, which is a stress hormone that's also created when you exercise, funny enough. Yeah, we'll get to that. So anyway, that's just a little bit about me and where this is all going. And I want to show you a couple of graphs from the book so that you can understand a little bit more about who might end up getting a missing period through HA. And it's not necessarily just the Olympic level athlete or former or current anorexic. There are 5 factors that are involved in whether you're missing a period, and for many women it's a combination of 1 or 2 or 3 factors, sometimes more, but everybody's different, and there's no one-size-fits-all answer. It's not if you do this, this, and this, you lose your period. It can be a little bit of exercise and a lot of restrictive eating, or it can be no restrictive eating at all, but a lot of exercise and underfueling without even realizing it. So there are a lot of ways that you can lose your period, and so let me get to telling you a little bit more about. It's important to note that for my book, I did a survey of about 300 women who had or have HA and have either recovered or gone on to use fertility treatments to get pregnant. So a lot of the data that I will show you come from those surveys that I did. So about 300 women, and I think that gives us a really good population to look at. So it encompasses everybody from those who did hardly any exercise to those like me who exercised 2 hours a day. I was having fun. It was a lot of fun. But then I stopped eating enough to fuel that exercise, and boom, missing period. So anyway, let's get to the data. What I did in this graph is I took the information from those 300 women that we talked about, and I broke it down into how much they were exercising per time they exercise, basically. So there were 9 women who didn't exercise at all. Some who exercised for 30 minutes, 45. This is sort of their average exercise session length: an hour, hour and a half, 2 hours, more than 2 hours. And then we have the days per week of exercise. So some women, again, we have the non-exercisers at 0. Some were exercising just 1 day a week, or 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And there are those of us who are exercising all 7 days a week and never taking a break. So anyway, what this graph shows is basically the bubbles show the number of women who are at each position. So we had 46 women who were exercising 6 days a week for an hour at a time. The median was an hour a day. So the median is basically the midpoint, and 6 days a week. So that is quite a lot of exercise. it's often thought of as healthy to exercise that much, but in combination with other factors like stress or underfueling, it can sometimes be too much for your hypothalamus, and it ends up shutting down your reproductive system, which means no period. But like I said, that's not everybody. I mean, there are some women who are exercising 3 days a week for anywhere between 30 minutes to 2 hours. Some women who are just exercising 30 minutes at a time, not a huge number, but it's definitely a part of the population. So just because you're not exercising every day and exercising for 2 hours every day like these women were, doesn't mean that exercise isn't playing a part in shutting down your periods. So the next thing I wanted to talk to you about is exercise intensity. So we asked the women in our survey at what intensity they were exercising before they lost their period, so before HA, and then when their periods were missing during HA. So the scores range from 0, which is basically sitting on the couch, not doing anything, up to 10, which is the absolute hardest that you can possibly exercise, like personal best record type exercise, where 4 to 5 is sort of an easy jog where you can still talk. A 7 is a heart rate of about 160 to 170. Can't really talk through it, that kind of range of exercise. So what I thought was really interesting is that our survey respondents told us that before they had HA, the average exercise intensity was kind of between a 4 to 6, maybe a 4 to 7. But then people seemed to be exercising more intensely when they actually did have HA, because the average score goes up to between a 6 to an 8. So that's just another piece of the puzzle to keep in mind. If you're doing high intensity exercise for 30 minutes or an hour a day, 3-4 times a week, that can be a lot for your body to deal with, especially, again, on top of if you're not eating enough or if you're experiencing a lot of stress. All right, here we are on take 3 of this segment. So that was a little bit about exercising and how much you might be doing and whether it might be too much for your particular situation or not. It's something to think about anyway. The next piece of the puzzle is how much you're eating and whether you're restricting the amount or restricting food groups. So I know that there are a lot of people these days who follow a paleo diet or low carb or gluten-free or low fat. And the trouble with a lot of these diets is that you can unintentionally end up limiting your calories. Like you might, especially if you're eating lots of fruits and vegetables, those are very filling without actually providing a lot of calories. So you might feel full, but you're not actually getting that much fuel or energy. And especially if you're exercising, there's a study by Stubbs et al. That will be on my website that shows that after people exercise, they ate more than those who did not exercise, but they didn't actually eat enough to compensate for the amount that they had burned in exercise. So that's something really important to keep in mind, is if you are exercising, it's really important to make sure that you are eating enough to make up for that. And a lot of us don't. And we start an exercise routine and we might lose some weight, and that feels great. And I know that's what happened for me. I was exercising about 2 hours a day, and then I started limiting my calories severely. And I didn't realize it at the time. I thought it was great. I thought I was being healthy, but I dropped a lot of weight really fast. And I got addicted to seeing the number on that scale going down. And I had a 6-pack for the first time in my life. And I really thought that I was doing the right thing until I went off the pill and I didn't get my period. And it turned out my body completely disagreed with me that a 6-pack was the way to go when I was trying to get pregnant. So anyway, let me show you now a little graph of how much food or how much fuel my survey respondents were getting when they had HA, i.e. missing periods, and how much fuel they were getting when they took exercise into account. on data from 174 women because not everybody tracks their calories, but many of us did, especially when we were deep in the throes of HA. So here it basically just shows the percentage of those 174 women who were aiming for each calorie target per day. So 1500 to 1800 is what is typically recommended for weight loss. So you can see that almost everybody was getting less than that. And so, I mean, we have women aiming for 1,200 calories a day, which is basically a starvation diet. And look at the Minnesota starvation experiment. They had men on 1,500 calories a day, and they lost a ton of weight and became really unhealthy and lost muscle mass and started obsessing about food. So it's interesting to see that we're choosing to eat this little amount of calories on purpose. So I don't actually have the graph from the taking exercise into account, but it is in the book. There was nobody who was getting more than 1,800 calories a day when taking exercise into account. The average was about probably 1,000 calories per day, which is definitely not enough fuel. So that's really important to realize, is that if you're limiting your calories and exercising on top of that, your body has to fuel the exercise because you're moving around. And so that leaves, it has to deal with whatever is left over for fueling everything else, including pumping your heart, sending the blood around your body, making your brain work, your lungs, just the daily movement that you're doing, and then all the work that your cells do inside you. So there's so much of what our bodies do that take energy on an ongoing basis. There are so many little organelles inside our cell that all take energy. And if we're exercising and not eating enough to fuel that, then all those other processes have to shut down. So if you feel cold all the time, that's one really great indicator that you're not getting enough fuel, you're not eating enough calories. I think the next thing to talk about is weight and weight loss and how that relates to whether you have HA or not. A lot of people think that you have to essentially look skeletal to lose your period, and that's really not true. So I graphed the distribution of BMIs of my 300 survey respondents. I use BMI because it takes height into account. So for example, 120 pounds on somebody who's 5 feet tall is very different from 120 pounds on somebody who's 5 feet 8. I know it's not a perfect measure, but it's easy to compute and you don't need any special equipment, so that's what we use. So next up, I will show you that graph, and then I'll also show you a graph of weight loss. So this is really interesting to me. When I looked at the data, I was really surprised to find that 82% of the survey respondents had lost more than 10 pounds at some point in the last few years. For me, yes, I had lost a lot of weight when I restricting my calories and exercising 2 hours a day. As I mentioned, I thought it was great at the time, but then soon came to discover not so much. And what's interesting is that significant weight loss like that can definitely shut down your hypothalamus and your menstrual cycles. And then it takes a lot of work to get them back again because your hypothalamus is shut down and you have to reactivate it, and it almost takes extra energy to do that than it does just to keep an ongoing cycle going, which is why you do see women who run marathons and have normal menstrual cycles or get pregnant at the drop of a hat. But that's not true for everyone. So let me show you those graphs, and then we'll come back and talk a little bit more about some of the other factors. Here is the graph that shows the distribution of BMIs among my 300 survey respondents. The median is about 19, and that's a technically normal BMI. According to the World Health Organization, normal is anything from 18.5 up to 25. Not really sure how they decided that that was quote unquote normal, but that's the range. So many women think my BMI is normal, 19 is normal, so my weight is not a problem, and many doctors think that as well. But as you can see, even women whose BMI is higher than that can lose their period. And I think it's really hard for people who are definitely look normal, not super thin or anything to be missing their periods, because everybody sees it as something for those who are super skinny, and that's really not the case. It's more about how much fuel you're taking in, how much you're expending in exercise and other activities, and how stressed you are. So stress definitely plays a part as well. But this just lets you see sort of the range of BMIs of those who have experienced HA, and that it's not just a problem for those who are severely underweight. It's definitely something that is experienced by those of us who are in the quote unquote normal range. All right, so here we have the graph that shows how much weight people lost prior to acquiring HA or missing periods. So on the left here, what I did was I grouped BMIs by, well, I basically just sorted them and then grouped them into percentiles. So we have each dot and line represent 10% of the population. So there were a subset of women who started at fairly overweight according to the WHO scales, which again, don't know where they decided those numbers fall, whatever, not important right now. And all the way down to those who were already pretty close to being underweight. And as I said, 82% of my survey respondents had lost more than 10 pounds at one time. And so this shows you from their sort of quote unquote high BMI, what they got down to. So I just averaged the starting BMIs, and each line represents 27 women, and then I averaged the BMI that they were at when they were missing their periods. So you can see that across the board, there's a decrease of 1 to 2 BMI units that's associated with a missing period. So if this is something that rings true for you, if you started, say, at a BMI of 23, which is where I was when I started my little weight loss program, and you dropped from there, down to just about 19.5. So that line actually represents my situation pretty well. When I went off the pill after having dropped all that weight, surprise, surprise, no period. And I think that's a fairly common occurrence. We lose weight while we're on the pill, and so we're still getting that monthly bleed because the pill provides synthetic hormones that essentially stop you from ovulating, so you're not having your natural cycle, which is why you're not able to get pregnant. But it also forces your body to have a bleed. And certainly if you're on the pill and not bleeding, that is a definite cry of your body for help. But that artificial bleed can mask the lack of a period that many of us experience when we lose weight like this. So that's something that's important to understand. Now we've talked about the first three factors that play into getting hypothalamic amenorrhea, i.e. losing your period. So those are 1, how much you're exercising, 2, how much you're eating or not eating, and 3, your weight/BMI, and if you've lost a bunch of weight at some point in the past. For some women, it's fairly recent. For others, it's a few years ago, especially those who were at a higher BMI. The weight loss can have an effect for a fairly long time afterwards, and that's something that we do talk about in the book, is for women who were at one point overweight and then lost weight, what effects that can have and how that can also lead to hypothalamic amenorrhea. So the last 2 factors are stress, and by that I'm talking psychological stress. So I think everybody knows that if you go through an incredibly stressful event like a death of a sibling or a parent, or just some of the horrible things that people unfortunately go through, that can cause you to lose your period. If you are experiencing daily stress from your job or a relationship, and then on top of that, you're exercising or under eating, that can actually create what's called synergy. So basically, the factors work together to amplify, and so it makes the effects even stronger, or in this case, worse than if you were doing any one of those things by themselves. So another component to recovering is definitely trying to reduce stress in your life. Acupuncture can help. Meditation, listening to podcasts, basically doing whatever you can to relax. I know that sounds really cliched because everyone says, oh, just relax and you'll get pregnant. And, people would say that to me when I was missing my, when I was not ovulating. And I'm like, I was relaxed when I started this whole thing. So thank you very much. Don't tell me that. But stress definitely plays a part, and there are biological reasons that it does so, because the hormone cortisol shuts down your hypothalamus. And it's interesting because a lot of us think that exercising is relieving stress, because when you exercise, your brain releases endorphins that make you feel good, so you think you're less stressed. But in fact, it also increases the hormone cortisol, so your body feels the exercise as stress and not as stress relief, which is a really hard concept to wrap your mind around. It's like, I feel good, so why is my body doing this to me? So that's something that's important to keep in mind, is what your stress levels are like. And finally, the last thing is genetics. So there have been studies done that have looked at the DNA of various components that are involved in the hypothalamic pathway. And they did find that in women who are missing their periods, there were some mutations, which is just small changes that make the proteins work slightly differently. So that's another reason, and not something we can do anything about, but sometimes it helps to understand, and because sometimes you feel like, why me? Why am I going through this? Why do I have to lose my period when Mary Jane down the street is way skinnier than I am and out pounding the pavement every day, and it's not fair? And so it helps a little bit to realize that some of it is beyond our control, and you can't compare yourself to other people because everybody's situation is unique. And so that is a little bit about why your period might be missing. And I have a lot more on my blog at noperiodnowwhat.com, and certainly in my book, which you can find on that website or also on Amazon. I have a couple of free downloads on my website, one of an information sheet that basically has all these figures and a little bit of explanation, and the first chapter of No Period, Now What, so that you can get a flavor of what the book is like. And hopefully this has been helpful, and I will do another one soon. Have a great night. Bye. Okay, haha, I lied. Not really goodbye, because I did also want to say that if you have any questions, feel free to comment on this video and I will respond or do another video that addresses questions that people have. So thanks so much. Now it's really goodbye.